A look at teen violence and some of your thoughts on the issue. That's what's coming up in today's edition of CNN Student News. Hi, I'm Carl Azus. Strategy and resources. Those are the big factors as President Obama considers the U.S. approach to the war in Afghanistan. He is holding a series of meetings this week, all of them focused on how the U.S. is going to move forward in the conflict and whether or not more troops are needed. General Stanley McChrystal, the top U.S. commander in Afghanistan, is expected to call for 40,000 additional U.S. forces. There are 68,000 troops in the country now. One leading Republican says that whatever decision the president makes, he needs to make it quickly.
We need to act with deliberate haste, and I believe an important aspect of this whole decision-making is that there are a number of options.
President Obama has said that one thing that isn't an option is leaving the war. That's a point echoed by his fellow Democrats.
I think the president is directly on target here. He made it very, very clear. Nobody is talking about pulling out or pulling up stakes.
Atia Abawi checks in with the current situation in Afghanistan and how that has changed since the U.S. military action began there.
It's been 8 years since the first U.S. boots hit the ground in Afghanistan, and the situation is nowhere near where the Afghan and the international community expected it to be. You have a resurgent Taliban, you have a government that's not recognized by all of the people, and you have military commanders on the ground stating that they have insufficient troop levels to this day to complete the mission here. But there have been improvements. For example, here in the capital of Kabul, you will see women walking by themselves, going to the store, going to work, and getting an education. But Afghans will tell you, although their lives have improved since 2001, it has reversed since 2005, and their situation has deteriorated drastically.
Breaking news last night. 3 major earthquakes struck in just over an hour's time near the Solomon Islands in the Pacific Ocean. There were no immediate reports of damage or injuries, but officials did issue tsunami warnings, although they were canceled fairly soon afterward. You can get the latest details on this story, CNN.com. Back in America, more than 60% of young people who took part in a Justice Department survey say they experienced violence in the past year. Attorney General Eric Holder calls that number staggering. And yesterday, he and Education Secretary Arne Duncan addressed the issue in Chicago, where 16-year-old Darian Albert was killed recently when he got caught in the middle of a street fight. But Attorney General Holder says this issue is not limited to one city.
Youth violence is not a Chicago problem, any more than it is a black problem, a white problem, or a Hispanic problem. It is something that affects communities big and small, and people of all races and all colors. It is an American problem.
Okay, now we have gotten hundreds of really insightful comments from you about teen violence in the Chicago fight. Catherine told us that if 16-year-olds are fighting bad enough to kill each other, then obviously they were not raised right. She suggests finding out why teens are so angry and wanting to fight. Abdallah says the only way to stop teen violence, especially between high schools, is for the rival schools to come together and be friends. David writes that teen violence is a copy of being bullied and abused by other teens. County officials should go to high schools and talk to teens about it. EO thinks that fighting is not always bad. One guy has a problem with another or a situation calls for self-defense. Then EO argues that a fair fight can help things. But this, he adds, was far from anything fair. And from Jeffrey, I pity that humans can be so inhuman. It's sad that anyone would want to do this. We are always looking for your comments at cnnstudentnews.com. You notice we only feature blog comments with first names, so when you write in, please use just that.
A word to the wise. Pandemic. Occurring over a wide area and affecting a large number of people.
The World Health Organization declared the H1N1 virus a pandemic back in June. There have been more than 340,000 confirmed cases of this virus, and one of them, CNN's own Dr. Sanjay Gupta. I sat down with him recently to talk about H1N1. Check it out. Dr. Gupta, thank you for being with us on CNN.
Yeah, sure.
Now, H1N1 doesn't exactly roll off the tongue.
Right.
Why call it that? How did it get the name?
Well, people have been calling it swine flu instead because they originally thought it came from pigs. When they first saw this, you remember this down in Mexico in the spring, They thought this originated with pigs and was probably a variant of swine flu. As they looked into it further, they found that in fact it has all sorts of different components in it. They had swine components, but also bird components and even human components. So that sort of started this whole process of like, what do we call this thing? And they decided to call it by its truly scientific name. So it's interesting, and this may be more than some people want to know, but if you look at the overall virus, it has a couple of different receptors on it. It has what's called a hemagglutinin receptor and a neuraminidase receptor. Most people won't remember those names, which is okay.
I won't.
But hemagglutinin, H, neuraminidase, 1. And it's the one receptor on both of those that is bound, so it's the H1N1. It doesn't roll off the tongue, and people have a hard time remembering that, but swine flu is a bit of a misnomer, and now you can tell your friends why it's called H1N1.
And stay away from swine flu then. That would probably be the right thing.
Yeah, I think it's really not an accurate name, so it's probably best to stick with H1N1, unless you can come up with something better.
I can't. Now, whatever we want to call it, you had it.
I
What
had
was
it.
that like?
You know, it was pretty hard. I got to be honest. You know, I'm not someone who gets sick very often, but I woke up with one of the sorest throats that I had. I felt a little bit crummy the day before, but then the next morning I woke up with just really sore. And the cough was one of these coughs where your whole body just sort of rattles. The chest hurts when you cough. And the lightheadedness, I think, was the most significant for me. I was actually covering a war in Afghanistan when this happened, so the living conditions weren't perfect. I would have much rather been at home, getting lots of sympathy from my family. But the sort of getting out of my sleeping bag, I could almost fall down just taking a couple steps. So I eventually decided to get this checked out by the combat hospital in Kandahar, and they took my temperature, which was quite high. And they tested me first for something known as influenza A, which is sort of the broader category of flu viruses. Then ultimately they confirmed it as H1N1. But it was, it was pretty tough. I'd say 2 days I was sort of just out of commission. Then I started to gradually get better.
How'd they treat it?
In my case, it was sort of mom's advice. I got some medications for my fever. I was told to take lots of fluids and get rest, which is hard to do, as you know, when you're in the field. But there is a medication called Tamiflu and another medication called Relenza. These are antiviral medications, different than antibiotics. The thing with those, Carl, is that unless you take them within the first day or two, they're really not going to have much impact. And in my case, I probably already had symptoms for a couple of days before I went to the doctor.
I see. So you just had to tough it out.
Toughed it out, and in that dusty desert tent.
Oh, that's rough. Now, how would that compare to a regular flu?
It's fun. I don't get sick very often, so I was trying to think about that same thing. I would say, this is the way I describe it to my friends. I think it was definitely worse than the regular flu. It just really knocked me down. I'm the kind of guy, I get the regular flu, I'll stay home from work because I don't want to get other people sick, but I'll meander around the house and do things and stuff like this. Here, I pretty much did not want to get out of bed. Every time I got out of bed, I was sore, my muscles hurt, that cough was awful, I was lightheaded, I had a fever, I had no appetite. That's what it was like. But I am here talking to you, totally fine, 100% back to normal. So, it was a few miserable days.
Good info there from the good doctor, and there's a lot more coming in part 2, so please be sure to check out tomorrow's show for the rest of my interview with Dr. Sanjay Gupta.
See if you can ID me. I was born in Alabama in 1880. I lost my sight and hearing because of an illness before I turned 2. I learned how to communicate thanks to the help of several teachers, and I eventually went on to become an author and teacher. I'm Helen Keller, and I'm one of the most well-known advocates for the disabled.
Keller was the first blind and deaf student to graduate from Radcliffe College in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And more than 40 years after she passed away, Keller is still making history. A statue of the famous advocate was unveiled at the U.S. Capitol yesterday. It is the first one to honor a person with a disability. During the ceremony, one lawmaker said the monument will always remind us that people must be respected for what they can do rather than judged for what they cannot. Well, finally today, you remember that nursery rhyme about the little piggies? Well, say hello to the real thing. These are micro pigs, and besides being super cute, they're the latest pet trend in parts of Great Britain. Based on this video, they apparently love to ham it up for the cameras. These pint-sized porkers only weigh about 9 ounces when they're born. They can cost up to $1,100 though, so you better start saving up if you want to bring home the bacon. That's our cue to head snout for CNN Student News. I'm Carl Azus.